All right, welcome to this YouTube special tier list. We are talking about the best cards in Pool 3 in Marvel Snap. All right, so a lot of people went and made a tier list, and I want to get in on it because I disagreed with some of their takes, but a lot of them are pretty close. But there's a couple takes that I think I would do a little bit differently. I made a tier list that's purely based off of power of the current decks that they're in, and assuming that you have all the cards. It's not something that you should use to maybe say, should I get this in my token shop? Because maybe it's in a very specific deck that requires a lot of really high cost cards. And if that's the case, you probably should not be picking it up unless you have those other cards. So I think the top tier card is Arrow because its ability is just so cracked that it is just in a league of its own. Nothing really stands up to it because of how strong that is. Going into A, I think She-Hulk is actually, a lot of people will maybe say it's S tier. She-Hulk is very strong, it's very flexible. It is a 10 power card that you can play out for like one cost on turn 6 if you end up skipping turn 5. So it allows for a lot of things like Moon Girl and Taskmaster with a Shuri being played out or anything like that. So you can play 2 She-Hulks, you can double the power of She-Hulk, you can play it with Taskmaster and have 2 20 power cards on the last turn. It's actually insane. So then we have Brood. Brood is up here purely because Silver Surfer is insane. Silver Surfer, if it was a Pool 3 card, would obviously be S tier up here, but since it's in Pool 4 and 5, we're not including it in this list. But Brood right now as it stands is just really good with the Surfer. All of these cards pretty much are going to be impacted by, does it fit into a Shuri list, does it fit into a Surfer list, does it fit into a Zabu list. Currently, these next 3 cards are the only 3 that kind of, I guess Sarah is definitely very good in the Surfer lists. Death and Wave are kind of good in these other She-Hulk lists. Just like in the Arrow lists, there's the Bayro Wave deck with Death that is still very good and it's coming back now that Leader is dead. Actually dead. We put them all the way down here, chat. And by chat, I mean YouTube chat. In the comments, if you're not subscribed yet, why aren't you subscribed? Subscribe to this channel. You know what I'm saying? And then we have Mystique. Mystique is just really good right now in the meta because it can be played in a lot of top tier decks. Played with Zabu, Darkhawk, played with Dinosaur, played with Patriot, played with Cerebro. There's just so many things you can do with Mystique. It's really good. Magneto is probably one of the best 6 drops that you can have just for like raw power, and ability is really good. There's a lot of 3 and 4s being played right now with the Zabu and Surfer, so it can really manipulate those cards around a lot. But at the same time, it's 12 power, which is one of the bigger cards that you can play out for 6. That's just like doesn't have a downside necessarily, even though it is technically a small downside sometimes pulling cards into your lone lane, but a lot of times if you use it properly, very good. And then we have the Menace, the actual Menace. I can't stand this card right now. This Spider-Man card in combination with Absorbing Man is actually infuriating. Just on turn 5, having yourself completely locked out of the game. You can't play a turn 6. You guys, I don't even know. It's just like not having a turn 6 just feels way worse than anything that would happen on turn 6. You know, the fact that I have to retreat, and I just hate retreating. I know a lot of people don't mind it. They're just like, oh, get out of this game. Bad RNG. But it's just like whenever they play double Spider-Man on turn 5, I'm just like, ugh. It's just so annoying. And it's so strong right now with Zabu. That's why it's A tier. Without Zabu, these cards would probably be like C tier. Dr. Doom, also one of the strongest 6 drops you can get. It's just like a really strong card in a lot of decks. Ramp Dr. Doom is actually really good. Playing like Dr. Doom Odin, Wong Dr. Doom. There's just like a lot of Dr. Doom decks right now. You can play out like Ebony Maw into a lane and Dr. Doom into it. It's a very strong card. I think that deck is actually very powerful. Definitely an A tier deck. So Dr. Doom is up here. Same with Dracula and Dracula and Lockjaw. Also very strong cards. They pretty much are dominating different parts of the meta right now. I think Dracula is very good in like Zabu lists, but also just in like some Zoo lists and some other just like general like it's not even played in like discard lists as much, but you can still play it in like an apocalypse list, even though that might be like one of the less good versions of the Dracula list that are out there. Lockjaw also just like enables so many different archetypes. You can play it in just like the basic zero drop with Thor and some other zero drops and pull some stuff out. You can play it in Thanos. You can play it in just a Dracula big card list as well. There's just a lot of different Lockjaw things out there. Very good at enabling and cheating out big value. Patriot, if you look at the data, Patriot actually performs a lot better than a lot of people think. I guess a lot of people do think Patriot's good, but even just Patriot, Ultron, Patriot things on itself, still good. Patriot is the enabling card there, though. Patriot, really good with Surfer as well, so that's why it's up in A. Just the Surfer lists, really good with Patriot. Hood, very flexible, 1-drop, 1/6 is a lot of power. If you end up killing the 1/2 as well, it becomes a lot more power as well. And then you also have Maximus, very strong card. It's one of the highest value cards you can get for 3. It's kind of fallen a little bit lower on the scale with Thor as well. Both of these cards are not quite as strong as they were just because Zabu and Surfer. I guess Maximus is really good in Surfer, but like Zabu, I guess, kind of took the wind out of these cards a bit because they're not 4-drops, right? So 4-drops being played out for less kind of make them feel not as powerful as they would be, because if you can play 4/8 for 2, that's a little bit better than the 3/7, right? But they're still very good. And then you have Red Skull. Red Skull is probably a surprise up here because a lot of people would maybe think that Red Skull is like a B card. But Red Skull in the current meta is being played in so many decks. It's in every Shuri list. It's in a lot of the Dracula lists. It's just a really good card in like Zero lists, Sauron lists. There's a lot to do with Red Skull. You can just play... a lot of people are just playing Red Skull without some of the support cards that you would have like Enchantress or Zero or Sauron. And it's still just really strong. It's the biggest card that you can get. That's not a 6-drop. Even with the 6-drops, it's like the 3rd biggest card in the game, right? Like there's not many cards that are bigger than it. There's like Infinite, and is there even anything else? I think it's just like Destroyer's tied with it. It's insane that it's only 5 power. So if you remove the ongoing ability, Agatha is not quite bigger than it. But yeah, that's the end of A tier. So I think everything else below it is slightly worse, a little bit more conditional. A lot of these cards are like the supporting cards to the good cards. So Daredevil, really strong card still. Being able to tell what your opponent's gonna do on turn 5 actually does give you a lot of insight, especially with the Galactus being a problem right now. Also with Spider-Man being a menace, being able to tell if you're about to get Spider-Man can help you save the game. Polaris, really strong with Surfer, really good 3-drop, pretty good power. Wong enables a few combos. It's really good with Zabu. It does telegraph some plays, so you can have to make sure that you're playing it in a smart way, that you're not going to end up just throwing the game because you played Wong out a little bit too haphazardly into a deck that can counter very easily. Arnim Zola, strong in Shuri lists, strong in some other ramp lists. I've seen people do some crazy stuff with this card. Actually pretty good. Doc Ock. So here's Doc Ock is another one that if people aren't in on some of the meta stuff that's going on right now, they might think that this is a little bit high up. I think Doc Ock is absolutely cracked in Galactus. Galactus specifically, I think the best Galactus list you want to be like, there is an argument that Doc Ock should be A because of that Galactus deck and because of like some Shuri decks. Doc Ock is actually winning games like crazy right now. Like it used to be kind of a meme-ish card that like you would pull out cards, you'd end up pulling their Shang-Chi out and it would just kill your Doc Ock, and then they'd win a lane because you just pulled all their good cards out of their hand. But now Doc Ock with the Galactus enables you to pull all their good cards out of your hand, and then Galactus a different lane, and then they have no more cards to counter your Galactus. So it really just shuts them down completely. It's kind of cracked. Cerebro, you guys didn't know this. You're talking to the Cerebro world champ right now, you know what I'm saying? Cerebro is a kind of crazy card. You can build decks from 0 to 10, and they're all decks that you can win with. Some of them are better than others. 2 and 3, Cerebro 2 and 3, actually really good. Actually pretty good. Not gonna lie to you guys. Cerebro 2 and 3 are like A or B tier decks, probably B tier, but still very good decks. Ghost Rider is good with Zabu and some other stuff right now. People are putting him into more than just straight up discard lists. Like you can have just a Sif in your deck, and that might be good enough to run Ghost Rider. Some people even, you know, run them in something like Cerebro 7, you know? There's a deck out there. That's kind of a meme though. Don't actually make that a deck. Debris, good against Galactus, good in Patriot, good in Surfer. This card is just a good around card clogging up your opponent. People play this in like garbage lists where you just give your opponent a bunch of stuff. That's also possible, even though that list might be a little bit not as good as you would think. Then we have Electro. This card potentially could be an A tier card. It enables a lot of decks that are very strong. You know, I might move this to A. I'm gonna move Galactus up. I'm gonna move Electro up. I think I didn't think that one through all the way when I first put it in there. I think Electro is an A tier card because it enables the Doctor Doom decks, the Galactus decks. There's just a lot of stuff that are very strong with Electro. So I'm gonna move that one up. And then we have Green Goblin. Good clogging card. It's good to be played out with like other cards like Debris, Titania, some other stuff. It's good in a few decks. It does have some, if someone's playing like Surfer though, it does end up having some like anti-synergy since it does get buffed by Surfer. So it does have that kind of limitation, or it might be a higher up card without those kind of limitations if Surfer was less popular. And then we have a Juggernaut. Juggernaut also really strong in Surfer, really strong like finisher, really strong just to manipulate where your opponent's going to play their cards. So if you know that they're going to play onto a Wong or something like that, you can push them off. With Storm, it's really good. You play Storm, you play Juggernaut, bumps them out of there as well. Mr. Negative is just a good card with if you have Bast, I think Mr. Negative decks are actually very good. In the deck, I think Bast really just like makes it a little bit more consistent because you're not retreating if you don't play out the Mr. Negative as much. I think the Surfer Mr. Negative list is the strongest list for Mr. Negative currently, but there are definitely a couple other Mr. Negative lists that are still pretty good, but I don't think that they're top tier. But I actually don't think that the best Surfer list is a Mr. Negative list, so that's why Mr. Negative is down here in B. Taskmaster, actually really good card with She-Hulk and Shuri. Like it is in most of the Shuri decks, but I think you can play it like it might be actually higher up. I think I'm gonna put Taskmaster at the top of B. I think Taskmaster is better in B than, it might even be close to A because of the decks it goes in are really strong, but I think the card itself is not quite as strong as the other cards itself. It's close though. Rockslide itself as a card is a B tier card. In the deck, it is in one of the best decks in the game, being the Zabu Darkhawk deck, but Rockslide is still just itself only enabled by those cards. It is only enabling the Darkhawk to be larger. It's getting discounted by Zabu. So the card itself is the B tier card of that deck. But it is still just a good card in that deck. So the deck is S tier, but the card itself is it's not doing as much. Like the card before Zabu came out was like D tier, so Zabu bumped it up 2 slots, which is pretty good. Titania, Really strong clogging card, really strong finisher card. It's a 1/5, which is the second most value you can get for 1 outside of Ebony Maw. If you zero this, it's really strong. But you can also just use it to clog up your opponent's lanes and also play it out on the final turns as well. We've seen some interactions also with like Moon Girl playing 2 of these out on the last turn. Very strong as well. Very good card. Typhoid Mary, really strong with Zabu right now. Good with Sauron, so it's a little bit higher than it would otherwise be. But just because of those 2 cards existing, I think Typhoid Mary is much better. People also can play with like Luke Cage, Zero, other cards that keep it from reducing your other cards. All right, so this card I think is going to be the most controversial card where I've placed it out of anything. I think a lot of people think Adam Warlock is trash and they think that he shouldn't be played. I would disagree with them because I think Adam Warlock is played in most Bast lists. So if you think Adam Warlock is bad, I think you just don't own Bast as a card. And this deck, this tier list is assuming that you own all of the cards. So it's just saying like from an optimized deck list standpoint, how good are these cards? And I think Adam Warlock is actually super good in Bast lists, super good in Valkyrie lists. And he's one of the only cards in the game that actually draw you a card. So I think it's good. And then we have Hela, also maybe slightly controversial for being in B and not in C. I think Hela is actually better than a lot of people think. If you play the deck out, it feels really randomy, but I think the amount of raw power that you're putting out there with the RNG just will outpace a lot of decks still, and you'll pull down wins, and you'll be able to pull out 8 cubes a lot of times because people are basically expecting that RNG fest to go, or they just hope you don't have Hela, and like a lot of people will play the game out so you actually get the showdown to happen, and Hela will win it for you more often than not, I think. Destroyer, this one I almost put down in C. Destroyer after it got nerfed to 15 power, even though it says 16 here. I think the 15 power nerf wasn't necessarily the thing that killed the card. I think new cards coming out actually killed the card to be a worse deck. It is still like a playable deck. Like Spectrum Destroyer is still strong, but it's not as strong. It's been moved down to like the bottom of B and on top of C kind of deck list. Still playable, but not nearly as powerful as the other lists that are good right now. Surfer lists, Zabu lists, Fury lists are all definitely more powerful. So Giganto down here in C, I debated putting Giganto in B because in those like Dracula lists and in like some other like Lockjaw lists, Giganto's actually kind of cracked. It's just one of the biggest 6 drops that you can put in your deck that don't like control your deck for you like Agatha. So Giganto's really good. And then we have Ultron. Ultron, some people also want to put this card higher. I think it is a good card, especially in Patriot. I just am not convinced that it's like as defining and strong as it could be. It's very telegraphed when you're playing an Ultron deck. So it's like definitely people can calculate if they can beat it, they can play counters around it. So it's a little bit too telegraphed a lot of times. I've seen some lists that are playing like untelegraphed Ultrons where they just have it as a finisher, and that's like maybe a little bit better. But even still, I do think that it's just like kind of out of the meta right now, so it's kind of down here. I could see it in B though. It's one of those ones that's kind of questionable. Quinjet also could be in B, I think. Quinjet is also questionable because it is playable in some like Moon Girl lists, some other lists that are like collector lists, and it's actually like Thanos, obviously. So with Thanos, I think this is one of the best cards you can play with Thanos. So it's very good in that. So it could be B for sure. Like I actually kind of want to put it in B right now, but I'm not going to. But yeah, it's very good in those lists. Then we have Psylocke. Psylocke enables pretty much 2 lists, both Galactus and Mr. Negative. I don't really see it outside of those two lists, so that's why it's down in C, because it's just like, it's an enabler to get those cards out a little bit earlier. But with Galactus, you can have Electro and Wave. With Mr. Negative, you can just play it on 4 and it's still pretty good. Like you can play it on 4 and then you can play Magic and it's pretty much okay as well. So Psylocke I don't think is like too good that you have to have it in those lists, but it is obviously consistency for Galactus, which is good. And then we have Mojo, which for a long time I would put Mojo up a lot higher, but the current meta, it's like a little bit rarer to, I don't know, get the value out of Mojo that you want. He's definitely fallen off a bit. I just don't see him getting activated as much. Yeah, I just don't see it being that good of a card. But when it does get activated, if it is in a meta, maybe once the nerfs happen for Zabu and Surfer, Mojo could shine again, because maybe Thanos will pop out as being one of the top tier decks. We'll have to see. Yeah, and Magic, we kind of just talked about what you play with Mr. Negative. I think Magic is kind of only playable in Mr. Negative lists right now. I don't know of any other lists that really play Magic that I can really think of off the top of my head that are very good. Like, I think Magic is also, it's a decent card right now to counter like the turn 5 Spider-Mans. She-Hulk Infinite, yeah, She-Hulk Infinite is one list that runs Magic. That's also a pretty good list, I guess. Yeah, that's true. And then we have Wasp. Wasp is playable in Lockjaw, playable in Patriot, but I guess it's also playable in Valkyrie lists. So there's like those 3 lists that run Wasp, and it's pretty effective in those lists. There's also a Shuri Shuri Odin list that runs Wasp. I feel like that's more of a meme. But I think with Valkyrie, it's very good. With Lockjaw, it's okay. A lot of people, I've heard both sides of this argument for Lockjaw, where it's like Wasp is good in it to like activate it, but then it also sometimes just like ends up getting pulled out of your Lockjaw, so it kind of can grief you on that side as well. But yeah, I think Wasp it's an okay card for those lists. A lot of these cards in the middle here are like okay cards for lists, and they enable some cool stuff, but they just don't really shine on their own in any way, and they don't really add that impact that you would see from the cards above. Jane Foster, yeah, it's like in Lockjaw lists, played with Wasp, played with Thor, played with Mr. Negative. I really don't think it's that good in Mr. Negative. It's kind of a high roll in Mr. Negative where you generally don't need to be drawing like the other 2 cards out if you're getting your Mr. Negative off and drawing the other cards. It's kind of like you've already won the game a lot of times if you're able to play out Jane Foster. Sometimes. Yellow Jacket, similar to Wasp. You play it in Valkyrie lists. You play it in like Bast lists. You play it in Lockjaw. You could, I guess it's not really that good in Lockjaw. I've seen some people play in Lockjaw and I feel like it griefed them. So probably not as good. But yeah, it's mainly like in Bast, Valkyrie lists. It really shines, I think, especially with Adam Warlock. And then Hellcow. Hellcow is good in Hella lists. I don't really know if there's that many lists. There's like a Apocalypse list, I guess, that run Hellcow, and it's pretty strong. It's still a 6-power card, which is not that bad. And if you want things to be discarded, it's pretty good. Captain Marvel. I used to have Captain Marvel a lot higher on my old list. I think Captain Marvel, it's kind of fallen off a bit. It's not as useful as it used to be, I feel like. I don't know, it's just like in the current meta, there's just so much power on the board that 6 moving power is not that good. Maybe if you were able to Shuri this card, but even still, you'd want Shuri Vision out instead of Captain Marvel a lot of times because of that extra power. And you generally know where you want to move the card a lot of times. And it just kind of griefs you if they have like a Dracula or something like that. Then we have Invisible Woman. Invisible Woman is played in some decks right now to good effect. It is played in Atuma lists. It's played in Hella lists. It's played in I don't know, some other ongoing list that you want to hide your ongoings and be Enchantress proof. But I think Invisible Woman is generally not in top tier lists. I guess it is also played in Cerebro 2, which is like a B tier list, I think. I think it's not even that good in Cerebro 2 right now. A lot of the Cerebro 2 lists have cut it, I believe, just because there are better cards you can be playing out. Rogue, surprisingly, is played a lot right now. I mean, not really surprisingly, because of how powerful a lot of the ongoing effects are right now. You can steal people's Zabus, you can steal people's Darkhawks. We were just playing a couple games, and we just kept getting rogued over and over and over again, like 4 games in a row. And we lost those games, 4 games in a row, because of the rogue. We had our dinos stolen, we had some other stuff stolen. It's really good in surfer lists. It's good in just some other lists as well. People playing like Mr. Negative is other things as well. Zero, really strong card. Zero might actually be higher up on this list. It's strong with a lot of the good Shuri lists right now. It's good with the Red Skull lists. Like, just there are zero lists themselves. The fact that the card is called a zero list might mean that it might be more powerful than I'm letting it be right here. I'm gonna put it in B actually. I think zero is gonna go to B. Zero might be too good to be that far down. Because zero does enable a lot of things. Next up, I guess also with zero, Sauron kind of does the effect of zero for all the ongoing stuff, but it is redundancy that helps make it consistent. Then we have Crossbones. Crossbones is a good card purely because of Zabu. Without Zabu, this card would be unplayable. So pretty much there's almost like a rule that there's no forecast cards that are D and below because Zabu has made them too playable, because just playing out forecast cards for 2 is too good. There's one exception that we'll get to at the end of the video, stick around, and that's going to be shown down at the bottom. We have to scroll down for that. And then we have Hazmat, which is buffed to 2 power, even though it says 1 here. Hazmat, I think the Hazmat lists, they kind of go hand in hand with Luke Cage. They are fun to play, I think. You can play some like trash that goes onto your opponent's side, play Debris, play Viper, play Goblins out. It can be a lot of fun to be able to see those huge negative numbers with like a Wong, Hazmat, even with Odin. You can go all in on Hazmat play. You have Luke Cage, so none of your stuff gets reduced. It's pretty fun, but I don't think it's like top tier deck. It's just like very middle of the road C tier kind of card. I would like to see it. I'm surprised they only buffed it by 1, honestly, if they're trying to actually buff it. I think Hazmat could go to like a 2-3 even and still be just an okay card. So I would like to see more buffs to Hazmat actually, because I think that list is kind of fun to play. Mysterio used to be my favorite card in the game, I'm not gonna lie. Mysterio actually used to be my favorite card when it was a 2-5. I specifically left it off of my like first tier list from being in the top that I ever made, because I didn't want I didn't want too much notoriety around Mysterio, but they nerfed him. They found out that he was actually too good. Like a 2-5 is actually so cracked at a 2-drop, because now Lizard basically has to take its place because Mysterio got downgraded 2-4. It's kind of crazy how 1 point can make all the difference, but it does feel a lot worse at 2-4. So it's been dropped down to a C. Yeah, and also with Scorpion, it is not a great card right now because Scorpion affects all of the clones as well, which makes it -1. And then we have Rescue. Rescue, for some reason, feels like a bad card, honestly. Like, I don't know what it is, but it's like I used to think Rescue was super cracked. Like the fact that it's Shongable is disappointing, because like it's just crazy that like a 4-8 could just be better than a 4-9 just from the fact that Shang-Chi exists. If they changed like the numbers that Shang could kill, like if Shang became like can only kill 10 plus power. That actually might be a good nerf to Sean, by the way. But then I think Rescue would be much more playable, but the fact that you're telegraphing that you have to play the card there the next turn, it's only giving you 9 power. Like, even in the Zabu list, it feels like one of the less good 4-drop cards that you can play. Just because you are putting it in strong range, and you're also telegraphing that you have to play another card there. Black Widow is a card that a lot of people think should maybe even be higher up. It's played in a lot of the Zabu Darkhawk lists. I think that Black Widow is kind of replaceable in those lists. I think it is good in those lists, but I don't think it's required in those lists, which is why it's down here. And I think that's like the main list that it's played in right now. There's like a few other lists that try to run this card, which are like the Hazmat Trash list and some other ones, but I don't think it's necessarily like a super crazy card. It is like good, but it's not good enough that it would be like considered like a great card that you should be looking at as like a pickup in your decks, and like for sure including. It's like never like a for sure include, I think. Omega Red, surprisingly up here, it used to be down in D and other cards. Obviously, it's playable because of Zabu. This is like another Zabu card. Omega Red and Drax, playable with Zabu. They're just like 4/8 plus 4/5 plus the plus power to the other lanes. Goose used to be a good card, but with Zabu being so dominating on the ladder, I think Goose just could be a D tier card, honestly, right now, because it's almost worthless in a lot of situations with all the Zabus running around, because you can play Zabu cards into a Goose lane. It would actually be good if Goose was like the original cost instead of the discounted cost, so that way you couldn't play 4-cost cards that were discounted there. I think that would be a good update to Goose, but obviously whenever Zabu gets hit, this card might become more relevant again. Scrolling down here, you get to see a preview of the bottom. We have a Moon Knight. A lot of people think Moon Knight is much more playable than this. I actually think that Moon Knight, currently without other cards that support discarding your opponent's hand, I think Moon Knight is not one of the better discard cards. I think it is lacking in power. It's similar to a Gambit, but better than Gambit, I think. Gambit's even less power. But I think Moon Knight, like, you pretty much would want to play one of the other discard cards instead of Moon Knight a lot of times, and probably doesn't make the cut in a lot of those lists. But yeah, I think it's just not good enough right now. And then we have Beast. Beast, I think, is maybe not quite a D tier. It's probably C tier a lot of times, but I just like, I'm not a huge fan of the Beast lists. I think a lot of those lists are not that good. Maybe if they are fully optimized and you're really good at this list, it would probably be better. I personally just don't play a lot of those lists, and I'm not very good at playing them, I don't think, so I put it down here. But I do think that it has the potential to be higher. I'm just not as good at playing those lists, so I don't see the value in it as much. But I do think that it is probably better than I'm leading on here. And I recognize that. That's kind of also tied with Viper. I also think the Viper list, personally, I don't think Viper is that strong. By that strong, I mean, I think it's generally like you're not getting the value that you'd want with it. It is much better right now than it used to be because there are not as many destroy decks out there. It used to be, I think, really bad. I would put it down at like the very bottom, down with all these other bad cards at F before, because destroy was so popular that if you're vipering something bad over to them, they could just destroy it. And a lot of times you'd end up having a Viper where you couldn't really play it into a lane you'd want to, because you'd have to do a 50-50 on like a card that you might not want to give them. So it ends up just being a bad card sometimes in that way. But I do think it is a little bit better right now because of the lack of destroy lists, and because there's some definite cards that you can give them some bad junk and fill up some lanes. Deadpool and Venom. there's a lot of copium right now where people are wanting that deck to be really good, but I just don't think it is. And it's just Deadpool in a lot of those lists could just be replaced for a better card. It's just kind of a high roll card. If you get Deadpool early and you start destroying it, maybe it's okay, but it's not actually that good. Yeah, I think if it gets a little bit more support, it could become a good deck, but at the current support, I think it's only good on certain hot locations that pop up and make destroy decks good, and that's pretty much it. Miles is one of those cards that, like, you feel like it should be good. Like, you should be able to make a 1/5 good, but it just becomes a little bit awkward, I think. A lot of times when I play Miles decks, I end up playing Miles for 4 anyway. So it's like, it feels like not that great if I'm playing a 4/5, because you have to set up a turn to play out Miles, and then on that setup turn, you might have to like play a little bit inefficiently to set up the turn properly, and then you might have floated a mana anyway. So it's like, there's a lot of times that I just feel like it's not getting the value that you'd want it to get. I think it just becomes a little bit awkward a lot of times. I think it has the potential to be good. Maybe if there ends up being like a move-ish deck where things move around, I think it could become definitely more relevant and become better. But currently, I think in the current deck list that we see, it's just not, it's not enough value. It's not enough that I would want to put into a lot of those decks. Human Torch, similar thing to Miles in that if move became a little bit better, I think Human Torch could be better. But there was a little thing where Second Dinner had come out and said that Human Torch is a slept on card, basically saying that it's got a higher win rate for not being played enough. So I think that's generally just like data not speaking well to the cards that it's talking about, because it's probably not actually saying that the power is as good as it is or as bad as it is. I think, yeah, Killmonger being able to kill 1-drops makes Human Torch a little bit of a liability. Also, Human Torch takes a lot of setup to get big, so you have to commit a lot of resources to it. So if there's anything that does kill it, you got to do a bunch of stuff to make that work. We have Colleen, also another discard card, probably the worst of the discard. Well, yeah, actually, I'm going to put it below Gambit. I think Colleen's worse than Gambit. It's probably the worst of the discard cards. Colleen, just discarding your lowest cost card. Most of the discard synergies want to like bring back discarded cards, I feel like. So the only card that really does well with that is Swarm, and I feel like Swarm is not really that strong in the meta right now. The APOC Swarm list, maybe once MODOK comes out, maybe, I don't even know if you'd still play it. You'd probably still just play MODOK. But yeah, I think Colleen Wing, probably not the best discard card. Gambit, speaking about Gambit, I think Gambit's good for memes, aka the Wong list, but I don't think Gambit is that good for anything beyond that. It's somewhat playable maybe in like a Lockjaw discard list where you're pulling out cards and killing some stuff, but you can definitely get like the whole combo off with the Wong Mystique Onslaught Gambit, but that's the meme I'm talking about where you end up killing their entire board. But to pull that off, I feel like it's very rare without getting shut down in some way with an arrow or a Cosmo. So I don't think it's that good. Dagger, similar to Human Torch and Miles, it's just not that good in move decks. I mean, like, move decks just aren't that good. So Dagger just itself just has that problem. Like, the move decks that are good are the ones that run like half move packages for surprise, and then they just run the good cards in the other half. Like Surfer. Black Cat, somewhat playable in like Hella, but they just buffed Black Cat. I still think it's not great. It's not quite an F tier card, but it's close. It's a card that like gets discarded from hand, so you can't really play it out, so you have to play it in something that can bring back cards. So I think in Hella it's playable. Maybe with Ghost Rider and some other stuff it's playable. But outside of that, I don't think it's really that playable of a card. Most of these cards down here are generally not really that played. Falcon, similar thing to Beast. I think it's just like a worse Beast a lot of times. If they ever become like one drops that like pulling back to your hand can give you a lot of value, I think Falcon could be good in it. But I think there's a lot of decks that like it just playing out those one drops again. It might be okay if you have like Quinjet and Thanos, but there aren't really that many bounce decks I feel like that are that good right now. Leader. Look what they did to my boy. They killed Leader. I tried to make it work. I'm not that mad about it, actually. I'm kind of glad that Leader got nerfed. I kind of wish it was a little bit more playable. Like, I wish it wasn't completely killed, because I think it did a job that needed to be done, which is like held some cards in check, because without the ability to copy cards in some way, like I kind of want Leader, like right now it says copy cards to the right. I kind of wish it said something like copy cards to the adjacent lanes or something like that, so you can play it to the right and it would copy the card to the left. If you play it in the middle, it would copy both sides. Like, it would just be like a little, like, it might be a little bit too good with the both sides kind of thing, but it's still, it's kind of just like unplayable right now, only copying cards to the right, because you can't really predict like where it's gonna go. I mean, it's not that you can't predict. Even if you can predict that they're gonna play in a spot and you play Leader to the left of it, you have to have set up that lane preemptively to be able to win with that card that you're copying and be able to win the lane that you're playing Leader into. So just like the fact that you have to do that makes this card very, very difficult to play. And most of the time, it'd be better to just play a different card like Arrow if you already have that setup done. So Leader, kind of a dead card. Next up, we have Kingpin. Kingpin, I think, is actually a playable card, and it's kind of fun to play. But it definitely can just be replaced most of the time by a better card. But it is fun to play. I kind of had Kingpin up higher before, but I put him lower. Kingpin does this thing where it might not seem like it's doing a lot, but it is forcing your opponent to play differently than they would necessarily do without Kingpin on the board, because they're like, hey, they have Kingpin. I have to like fill this lane up. I have to make sure that they can't pull my cards there, so I have to play there on the final turn or something like that, because if you end up pulling cards there on the final turn, the biggest problem with Kingpin is that it only affects turn 6, so it's pretty easy to play around, which is why it's down here. Your opponent can easily play around it. It just needs some sort of change to make it so it's not only turn 6 or has something else going on. It used to be like the next turn, which was even worse somehow, but it's still, yeah, it needs a little bit of love, needs some sort of change, I think, to be playable. Nick Fury, this card is definitely an interesting card. I've seen people play it, but I don't think it's really good really in any deck. Like, you might play it in some sort of like dino list, in some sort of collector list, but I think it's just adding random cards to your hand just generally isn't it, you know? I'd rather have something that's more consistent, have more of a consistent game plan. Now, speaking of that, there was a little bit of discussion earlier I had with Dexter, who said, hey, maybe getting random cards in battle mode is not so bad, because then your opponent doesn't know what to play around and you might be able to sneak out some wins. So maybe random generation might be a thing in battle mode, so we'll see. But this tier list is not based around battle mode, but maybe we'll have to make one of those once we start refining battle mode lists. Next up, we have Ronin. Ronin is a playable card, which is why it's not an F tier. But it is not that playable, because it's really based around how many cards your opponent has left in their hand. So if you're not playing any sort of things that can give your opponent's cards, it's probably not that good, because a lot of the decks that are being played right now are dumping their hands. Like Zabu just It's able to play out a lot of their 4-drops. Surfer plays out Sarah, plays out the other cards. So it's not that good right now in the current meta. And now we have the F tier. These are the cards that definitely need buffs. I hope that they buff all 5 of these cards in the future, because I think that they're all kind of unplayable. Like, they're unplayable to the point where it makes the decks worse if you put them in. Like, and by worse, I mean, like, it makes the decks just, like, considerably bad. I think Quake is maybe the exception, in that Quake could be somewhat okay in some sort of weird meta. But maybe in like some hot location settings, but even still, it's still bad. The fact that they put Quake and Crystal and made it so you can only play at mid for the ability to go off, it's like, why would I want to put a card in my deck that has an ability if I don't want that ability to go off? Like, it pretty much makes it so that like the cards are only played through random generation, and then they're like, if I got this random Crystal, maybe I don't want to discard my whole, or shuffle my whole hand. And that's pretty much where I thought that they were thinking. They were thinking this is like a random generation card they get, but why make it a collectible card if you're only going to play it through random generation? So I think these cards should get buffed. Like, Crystal could be like a 4/8, honestly, like, and still be like questionably played. Being a 4/4 is just like, and only playing in mid. I think, yeah, it's just, Crystal is the worst card in the game. This is the 1/4 drop that I said. It's the one Zabu card that like you still don't want to even play in Zabu because it's just not worth playing. Agatha, having your cards played out randomly by the AI that just randomly plays them. It's not even AI because it's not intelligent at all. It just plays it randomly. Turns out it's not that good. And having a 14 power card is not really that crazy in this game because you can get 14 power cards off of 4-drops like Darkhawk. So it's not even that like good to end up cheating this out in some way. If Agatha was like 16 power, maybe it'd be worth it. If it was 20 power, definitely worth it. But yeah, I don't think it's worth it at 14 power. It's not that crazy. Quake, just talked about Quake. The fact that you have to only play in the middle lane, not very good. If Quake was like a 2/4, maybe it'd be playable. And then Black Bolt, surprisingly, 5/8 is not a really good stat line, especially for an ability that doesn't really do that much. Discarding your opponent's lowest cost card does not really do that much currently, especially since you have to play it on turn 5. So generally their last turn play is not their lowest cost card, so it's not really doing much. But maybe in the future, if there's some sort of meta where they do hold on to their lowest cost card and you need to discard that, maybe it'd be okay. But or if there's another card that when you discard a card from your opponent's hand and it actually does something, and can be played out for 1 or something like that, you know what I'm talking about? It might be okay. Baron Mordo, it's like a free card draw for a vanilla stat line for your opponent. Like, what if it draws a 6-drop for them? You just drew them a 6-drop for free because it gives their card, or I mean, it draws them a card and makes it 6 cost. But a lot of times, it's like the same thing as Yondu in the sense, like Yondu, if you destroy the next card for your opponent, that's basically just like destroying the bottom card on their deck, right? So it doesn't really do anything. And it's anti-synergy. I mean, yeah, it just like draws them a card. It's just not good. This card should be like a 2/5 and then it would be playable. It's just like, they need to change this card in some way again. They tried to make it good. It used to only add like one cost, and then they made it 6 guaranteed, and it's still not playable. But yeah, they need to buff these 4 cards. But yeah, that's it. That's the whole list. Let me know what you think. If you guys have anything that you think should be changed, feel free to put in the comments. See you guys next time. Thanks for watching. See you guys.